before I get into the topic, my own presentation, I think I want to give some credit to the whole concept of sustainable or carbon neutral and net zero, because that kind of built my career. I mean, after doing my PhD, I worked on 3 sustainable urban environment. If you know, EPSRC had a flagship program called SUE projects, which started, I think, in 2006 onwards or 2005-ish. That was about the time when I was just stepping into my own postdoctoral career, and I luckily got involved into all 3. That was the era when it was more to do with carbon neutral. So there was a lot of focus on getting carbon neutral. That was the buzzword. And in the last one, actually, in SUE3, I became the research co-investigator. And since then, I became Marie Curie Fellowship Fellow, and then got my first lectureship post, and hence on. So what I would say is, what has changed over the period is the problem has remained the same, but then I think the narrative has changed, and also the focus on and the drive, I think. Okay. For today's presentation, as probably Rafi said, I have a few other projects. So this is not an event for me to disseminate any research output. I'm not bound by, and I think this is more a forum to take a back seat on saying, where are we heading to? Okay. So as I said, carbon neutral now became net zero. So I still feel a bit skeptical that COVID-19, if somebody did a statistic on the number of hits for COVID-19, I think COVID-19 would still stand out the most keyword, whereas net zero will soon take over, I guess, if COVID doesn't come back. Let's be positive on that. But what is net zero? And it's becoming a beast. That's what my perception is. It's becoming a beast in terms of its interpretation, but then also we need to touch the beast carefully. And that's today's discussion is all about. Okay. So the dilemma. And I think what presentation I have, I've got 15 minutes, I guess. So I just want to focus on energy environment bridge, because that's what we do at IAST, the Institute of Energy and Sustainable Development. And then I will show a case study, and all the discussion which I will have is mainly on scoping of technology for this horizon, which is 2030. We still, I personally don't know what will come up, which will be revolutionizing this whole arena after 2030. We are still taking steps with the technologies we have. So that's the discussion we will hold. And in the end, I will give some trends and future direction. So obviously, as I said, I've been working in this field. So there are a few things which I've been writing early on, and I've just clipped it here because there is an area where we were pushing a lot on carbon, not just now, but from days ahead. But there is a lack of balanced activity on pollution, because that's another strength which I have in my research. So, for example, there is a target for 2050 for greenhouse gas emission, but still there is no target for air pollution. Okay. And then the third one, which is slightly taking on my energy hat, is we did a paper with an energy expert from Thailand. And what we found is the technologies which are being developed have got a trade-off. And it has some limitation in terms of its adaptability. And just now I was talking to Professor Amin for a Jordan case study, and he did admit that there is an acceptance issue just on the basis of cost. And I think this, which was written in 2018, captures that issue, which is there is an economic and environmental performance trade-off for any technology we adopt. Yeah, and there is a need for more holistic understanding of that. Final one is the future. A lot of diversion is from fossil-based sources. It's either from the passion or it's the science, both driving this. There are a lot of I would say fanatics who are very much keen on getting green just for the sake of getting some kind of a social media presence. But then everything is transitioning from fossil-based to a natural or non-fossil-based. And one risk is some of these could have a new problem arising from new materials which we are trying to propose, mainly in case of personal care products, because we know that a lot of solvents currently are fossil-based, and we know the chemistry of that. The moment we want to move away from that, we will have maybe a snapshot of the positives, but we need to see the holistic view. What are the feedbacks they are generating? That's not my area, but as I said, today's discussion is not all me. Yeah, it's more to do with the whole beast. this is quite my area. So I'm thinking about energy environment nexus now. And this is a statistic coming, I think it's also maybe updated by now, but it's a 2020 BASE report. If you all know what is BASE, it's a Department of Business around industry and strategy, yeah, BASE. So 2050 target is, or it's an estimate is, we would have doubled our energy demand. Figure is there, and it's doubled relative to 2019. Why? Because everything will be driven probably by electric vehicles as well as our heating systems, or most of the daily uses. If we take that word, not all of that could be provided through renewables. Of course, the wind turbines and the solars are getting very positive indications in the UK context, at least the when offshore winds will take over. But then there will be still some combustion related. I'm talking about the perspective from 2030 technology at the moment. They will be combustion based, of course, more gas related, but then there is an element of carbon capture technology, which is strongly driven by the community who trust this as a fail-safe technology for still going on with big plants, big power plants. Yeah. Maybe all of us know what is carbon capture and storage. I don't need to give more detail on that. I mean, that's outside this discussion. But then what it does is it has its knock-on effect. Probably we do need to know that. So what knock-on effect it has is, first of all, the process itself has a more energy demand. So there will be likelihood of per unit electricity going up in terms of its resource demand. So 25% more energy will be required. And also because the process has some chemical involvement of solvent stripping, which I also have some element in the next slide, there will be some indirect emissions, and also in terms of the fuel which is used for compression, transport, storage, other process in the chain. Yeah. So that has been already modeled. So we know that there will be about 25% more demand. Then is this issue, which is also of my interest. I'm doing a PhD research, working on 2-3 master's project I've done for North Africa in this area. It's an evolving science. Is because we know that the renewable energy asset lifespan is relatively small. Of course, it is going to be made sturdier, but then maximum, let's say 30 years from its installation. That's what we are talking. Batteries was less so, but then if it is a large wind turbine we don't want to replace it every 5 years. So, I mean, the models mainly assume them to be 20 to 30 years duration. That's the label lifespan. It may go larger. I mean, some countries, like if you have a car, normally the operational time is 10 years, but then we want to use a car for some people. I've seen the registrations from 2000 or even before. So that's how life is. Keeping that way, I mean, the chances of getting more and more waste generated, if we keep that lifespan as in our models, we will be generating huge amount of waste stream from the renewable assets, renewable energy assets. Yeah, and what is happening currently, 2022, and this is again evidence, is 50,000 tons of waste is already generated from the first generation of wind turbines, which were in Denmark and let's say those countries which boasted their renewables in the first generation. And because their technologies were not that efficient, they're having more waste because they were not using more composite materials for their efficiency and other things. So they are more likely to have waste. Yeah, that's established, 50,000 tons. The estimate based on some other assumptions is by 2050, we will have 43 million tons of waste from just wind turbine blades. Okay, so that's another knock-on effect. Then I come mainly on the pollutants generation, because that is an area which I also have got interest in. So while we are focusing more on carbon, what are the effects on pollutants which we will have to face? And there is a good report, which I have a citation from Royal Society, which kind of captures that. I'll try to go a little bit faster because I have a few more slides on this. So carbon capture is mainly using a solvent, which is nitrosamine, more chemistry there, sorry for that, but then it is considered as a carcinogen, yeah, cancer causing. So those things which have to be dealt with. The non-fossil solvents, which I mentioned about moving away from fossil, there is limonene, but then we don't know about its chemistry fully. So what secondary pollutants will be generated? I think this is a report which, if you get a chance, it's a comprehensive report recently has come up by all the experts who work in both ways, both climate as well as pollution side, and they're all knowledge people. So I trust their outcomes. Then is this issue about transitioning. So we are transitioning from now till 2050. we still will have to use some technologies, especially in terms of district heating or some kind of community programs which are using CHPs, which were installed maybe just a few years ago as a green solution. So we can't just get rid of them. And that's what my case study is dealing with. Yeah. So let's just think about those things. This is kind of a clipped figure from this Royal Society report. Mainly, if I could give an idea, you can have a chance to look closely. If you can't read everything, don't worry. The green is making a positive for both pollution as well as, when I say pollution, it's mainly air pollution here, and climate. And on the other hand, the extreme is not doing much for both. And then there is some initiative which may be making air better, but the climate worse, and some which will be making the reverse of that, the climate better and the air worse. Okay, I won't go into detail. There are some of them which I have got in one more slide, so don't worry about that. Now comes the dynamics. So the planning dynamics, which has to coincide with these initiatives, and mainly it has to be delivered by councils. Maybe you all know, people from Nottingham, that Nottingham has aspired to become climate neutral or net zero by 2028. And there is a very nice article which has come about in terms of how they are trying to achieve, and they're trying to achieve it through making more digital what you call digital twinning interpretation of reality, just to simulate some of their scenarios and then select from there. And the council has taken a big initiative. They've got big money as well to deliver that. So Nottingham is just our neighbor, and then they are trying to, and it's only one council at the moment which has done so in the UK. So that's something to look for. But the case study which I'm going to do is from Newcastle, where I was previously working on the project which had funded it. This was about community boilers, and it was mainly, at that time, the council supported that a lot of their assets, mainly their colleges and primary schools and secondary schools, will have boilers replaced from conventional gas fire to biomass. That was, I think, to 2015. Whether they're still going ahead or not, that's something which I didn't check on, but this is a scenario. And then is a very far away, but it's a fast-growing city in India. That, of course, we know Delhi. That has another dynamics, and the dynamics there is expansion. So we're not talking about all the greens, but then, of course, Delhi has, in last year, has taken a big step in becoming electric vehicle bus routes for their public transport. So they are trying to transition rapidly to, but then the challenge for them is they have expanded. So their transport network has grown. So it's like it's a web which is like growing in different directions, and we need to balance that. Then comes the realization of concept, and there are a few things which you can take it in both as a comical way as well as in a serious way, is the interpretation of our concept, or how as big bodies have identified it. It became like, first tag was EU should become climate neutral by 2050. And this is very recent. Then soon it came out, we are trying to decarbonize and become net zero by 2050. So obviously keeping up to pace, or just the language is also changing. And of course, when we say these initiatives, there are in some of these areas, so it's not just energy. There is a combination of different gamuts which need to be, they all need to be tied into, and that's why working in net zero in an interdisciplinary fashion is very crucial, or at least understanding the language. The good thing which my sustainable urban environment projects did, we were working in big consortia, and they were all kind of people. So we were having this opportunity to understand their language. So I was not expert in soil science, but at least now I know how that could feed into net zero. Now, this is the kind of framework for how much time I have.
Oh, you still have 8 minutes?
Oh, plenty time then. Okay, I just wanted to think how much I can throw into this. So this is the framework which we use for our case study. And the horizons, as I said, were 2030. 3 parts were used. One was making things greener in literally greener. Yeah, so making more of the streets greener, rooftop, all those things. But then what we were saying is we were mainly relying on species which had a balance between providing also the fuel supply for our biomass. So some of those projects which had, I think in the early 2010s started, or maybe in early, let's say up to 2020, they were still being piloted as growing local biomass for feeding these biomass boilers. That was the notion, but then suddenly things, because of the Environment Agency claiming that there is more pollution generation from biomass boilers, that has kind of slowed down, but still there are local authorities who have biomass boilers. Then comes the greens is having positives. The positives is, of course, you are lowering temperature, but then there is on the other side, you will potentially have some emissions which are called volatile organic compounds, and they're biogenic, and that could kick in some other aspect of solutions. Green transport is very much at the heart of current drive, and I think what we saw, and this is also part of the main finding which we kind of captured in this one slide I have got from there, is showing actually that if you reduce the nitrogen oxides, well, making electric vehicles, first of all, you know, there is no emissions. I mean, I'm not talking about the supply chain and other things. We are just talking about the operation. There is no greenhouse gas emission from there, and there is no NOx emission because there is no fossil-based fuel, no combustion at all. But what will happen on the negative side is you need to power that. And powering that is, as we say, carbon capturing of large plants, or we have biomass initiatives to feed the power stations like CHP plant, or if it is hydrogen, which is coming from other sources. So depending on how we generate this hydrogen is also important. Some assumptions we made in that scenario, but then of course things have changed over a period, and that's why I say what will come up after 2022 is still going on. So how hydrogen can be created more kind of sustainably will also kind of change the scenario. And then the third one was, of course, how the powering of the boilers. So at the moment, the assumption was that gas will be replaced by locally sourced biomass. The scenario itself, as we said, is this. The two timeline, or the timeline remains same, but then the two the data which we used was one for just the baseline, which was based on predictions or the projections which we evidenced. And then the second one is mainly making it slightly excessive or aggressive. So say, for example, I just assumed if it is like electric vehicle initiative completely removes or it significantly reduces the NOx. So ultra no or low. So of course it will go down. We are still talking 2030, not more. So by then it's not mandatory to have all those regulations which the government has brought in about electric vehicles. And the scenario case study site was there. I think I will skip these data because that was mainly coming from some documented data on how we could map the actual emissions for these areas. The key emission, let me tell you, is the NOx, which we predicted, and it was based on some projections. Maybe you see DEFRA projections for 2030, 40. They have got all the inventories for different sectors. And then we actually, this is important. So these two slides I'll focus on. So this is the baseline 2030, and I've got nitrogen oxides in tons nitrogen per year. It's total nitrogen, sorry, year. Yeah. Now what we're happening is this is still baseline. So we have assumed the forecasted reduction, but that is the maximum, if I can just read, is 826 ton nitrogen per year. I won't worry too much about the rest. Let's just focus on NOx. Then if we have aggressive, so say if it is, or if the electric vehicle push or initiative is rapidly transforming the scenario, then obviously it will be very low nitrogen. So we have reduced by 100 times. So if the nitrogen goes by 100 times in that scenario, so this one, the maximum is 8.2. What we are trying to capture here is mainly is this scenario, which I will interpret. Okay, I will give 1 minute to this. We use those data to run something called a chemical transport model, CTM, and it is more to do with the flow of the air temperature and the emissions. Now, if people know, or if ozone is one air pollutant, especially in the troposphere where we are, which can cause respiratory illness. And in summertime, it can create a lot of smoke. So ozone is a culprit which can be very subtle. And if we are not considering the chemistry of how ozone is generated, because its oxidative chemistry is very, very complicated at the moment. It's not just single equation, and it depends on a lot of precursors, let's say. When we reduce the nitrogen oxide, because nitrogen oxide play a key role in oxidation chemistry for ozone, it can overshoot because the oxidation of free radical, which is used, could, 1 minute. 1 minute, okay, so it's not available. So what we are saying is the ozone can go up. Okay, I think this was my last slide here. So what we are having is, this is again coming from the Royal Society of the Royal Society's findings, and what they have is all the policy impacts from different initiatives which could be driving net zero. And one of them, if you see, is what we are saying about building energy efficiency, which is not my area at the moment, but then building energy efficiency could go both ways. It can have marginal improvement in air quality, but it can also worsen it because of the sealing and also how much of the extra pollution could be generated from the new solvents which we are taking. Because you may not have realized, but we use a lot of chemicals which create subtle issues for health. That's it. I think I'm on my last slide. So what we said is integrating electric vehicle and renewable energy offers some common vector for co-managing, but it has to have some sustainability initiative at the local level, and that's where the research could kick in. As the slide showed about, if we reduce NOx, there is chance of overshooting the ozone. These two I've highlighted mainly. It's a message from today, or take-home message rather, is the potential impact is still not quantifiable because it's a rolling scenario. And we still don't know what technologies could be implemented and the intensities of them. The last one again is when we are saying net zero, we still have these technologies at a very pilot scale. We have not scaled up, and we still don't know their acceptance at scale and the costs implied. Yeah, so that's where I think I will finish off. This was mainly a presentation, not from a specific project, but give a wider thought. Thanks very much.